A few other housekeeping items. The slides will not be shared with everyone, so do feel free to take notes or screenshot the slides as we go throughout the presentations. And I'd like to ask everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. Tell us a little bit about what your business, where your business is located, what brought you here, what you're looking forward to getting out of this webinar, and how many employees you currently have, and your location. That would be great if we can get that started in the chat. Do stick around until the end. I have a free checklist I will be sharing. I will be dropping the link in the chat at the end of the presentation, so do stick around. And then I will open it up for Q&A at the end of the presentation. But if you do have questions, please feel free to drop those in. I don't want anyone to forget what their questions were. I will be checking those in a little while as well. The intended audience for this webinar. So this webinar is for you if you are a small business owner, or if you're thinking about hiring your first employee, or if you already have employees, but you're not confident that you are fully in compliance with HR regulations. The webinar is not for you if you're not intending to be in compliance with the regulations that mandate employers to be in compliance with HR laws. I am getting a little feedback, so I will ask everyone if you can please mute your microphones. That would be great. And I'll open it up for questions at the end, and we can unmute ourselves at the end. A brief disclaimer: as many of you know, human resources is an ever-changing discipline. The materials covered today are for informational purposes only and not intended to be legal advice. You should check, or I encourage you to do your own research before implementing any of the materials covered in this presentation. You can seek legal counsel or an expert that can help you make those decisions and determine if anything is applicable to your business. Okay, with that being said, let's dive right in. The agenda for today, if you just joined us, we are going to cover how to build an HR structure for small businesses. Also, we'll talk about the Safety Workplace Violence Prevention Plan, and the new law, Senate Bill 553, that went into effect this year, and is going to be effective as of July 1st. So we have a tight deadline there. And then I'll cover a few other mid-year updates. And at the end, I'll open it up for Q&A. A brief background about myself. I've been in human resources for 17 years now. I'm also a small business owner of a boutique consulting firm called Solvit HR. I'm a certified human resources professional, and I provide services to mainly to small businesses, though I've worked with larger organizations. My passion is helping small businesses be in compliance. I find that they are the most vulnerable out there without a human resources department to back them up. So that is my forte. And some of my hobbies, I like hiking, yoga, and you can find me at the beach anytime that I have free time. Okay, let's dive right in. So a few foundations for getting started with your human resources structure if you're a small business owner, and give you a little background of what really drives those foundations. We have several different laws that mandate employers to do certain things. We have Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that basically mandates employers not to discriminate against an applicant or an employee based on a protected category. And those protected categories could be either race, color, religion, their sex, or national origin. So employees are protected from discrimination based on those criteria. And also we have the American with Disabilities Act that prohibits discrimination for someone that is disabled. So someone that has a disability, an employer must try to find a way to accommodate or work with that employee to retain their employment throughout the relationship. And additionally, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Act which basically mandates that all employers ensure that they are providing a safe work environment for their employees to be able to perform their job duties in a safe way. And last, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. This has everything to do with how you compensate employees, when overtime is applicable, the minimum wage that you should pay them, the minimum salary you should pay them. And actually, we have updates to that, which I'll discuss later. But that's all looking at compensation. So when we're thinking about setting up an HR structure, we're really thinking about those four areas. So those are like the main things that a business should have in order to comply and be able to build a strong structure to build upon and to grow. So we have payroll, a payroll pillar, hiring and onboarding, managing employees, and then your workplace safety compliance as well. And what I mean when I say payroll, your payroll structure, right? So there are certain procedures or certain rules that you need to follow to be able to set up your payroll structure. Firstly, if you're again thinking about hiring your first employee, you haven't been paying individuals already via payroll, you will need to register with the IRS and also with your state employment tax agency for an employer identification number. And that number is mainly used for you as the employer to be able to remit payroll taxes. And when I say payroll taxes, what I mean is we're paying for Social Security, your portion of Medicare, and unemployment insurance tax, both at the federal and the state level, okay, for those taxes. And, it's really important that employers understand their obligation, because you're required to, in addition to that, you're required to file quarterly reports or quarterly taxes for, to the IRS, and also for any state agencies that mandate those regulations. Wage and hour compliance, again, in accordance with the Fair Labor Standards Act, you want to make sure that you're paying your employees at least the minimum wage, minimum salary, and you're paying them for overtime when it is applicable. Keep in mind that these are federal mandates. Different states have additional requirements. As we have seen, a lot of states are slowly adopting regulations for their own minimum wage at the local city levels, or sometimes at the county level. So if you do have other mandates in your state that require you to expand onto those requirements from the federal government, you definitely need to comply with those requirements as well. And again, you want to make sure that those tax filings are never late, because if they are, there are penalties up to 15% that you can incur as an employer for not filing those taxes on a timely basis. A lot of businesses start out with independent contractors as their workers, as the labor that they need, the day-to-day help. If you do have 1099 employees, you're still required to file for a 1099 with the IRS, and you may also be required to file one with your local state agency if you're paying that independent contractor at least $600 or more in the year that they are performing work for you. And in addition to that, you need to provide the worker with a copy of their 1099. And if you actually have an employee, or you have converted them to an employee throughout the previous year, you need to provide them with a W-2 by no later than January 31st of the following year. And that is, that is the basic requirement from both the IRS and most state agencies. The second pillar to building a human resources structure for small businesses would be looking at your hiring and onboarding, right? So starting out with your job description. And the job description is the most important document in the employment relationship. A lot of companies, believe it or not, even larger companies, will skip this step of developing a job description. The job description essentially is an agreement, is what an employee is agreeing to work or to perform for you as part of the employment relationship. So it is crucial to have a job description. A lot of things I see, or a lot of times what I see from businesses struggling to have employees meet performance standards or perform at a certain level, is because they don't have a job description. They have skipped that step in the beginning, and this is not a step you want to skip, because again, the job description is the most important document in the employment relationship. It really sets the foundation, it really sets the agreement for which an employee is being hired for your company, for your business, to come perform essential job duties. It lets them know what the minimum physical requirements of the job are, the education requirements. You're going to take that job description, and if someone has a disability, you're also going to see, is this person able to perform the job in accordance to the physical demands of the job description. You're also going to use that job description to give them a performance evaluation, right? So down the road, you're going to take those job duties and say, hey, is this person performing at the level, performing all of their job duties and performing at the level that they should be? So really, the job description is crucial in order to set an employee up for success in your business or in your organization. Based on that job description, you will take some of the qualifiers or some of the requirements of that job description and build out your job post. You can post that either, on whichever job board that you find the most effective for you. A lot of times employers use Indeed. There's a myriad of other job boards that you can use. But once you do have the job description, create the job post. There is a difference between the job description and the job post. The job post is telling the basics of the position, but also telling the employee what's in it for them, what benefits you offer, what perks come with the job. Once you do have the job description and you actually have gotten applicants applying for that job, you're going to go through the interview process. Now, again, this is another area where a lot of employers kind of skip looking at the details of this area. So in a lot of applicants, actually, this is where they drop off, where they lose interest in pursuing a position, because a lot of times what happens is they won't get a call back, they won't get a response on whether they're selected to the next step or not, and so they will lose interest and move on. There was actually a research done by the Society of Human Resources Management about a year or two ago that showed that a lot of applicants were not applying for jobs, or were being discouraged from applying to jobs because they hadn't heard back from recruiters or from the hiring managers as to what their status was going to be in the recruitment process. So again, this is not a step you want to skip. You also want to have it laid out as detailed as possible, have a questionnaire beforehand to be able to ask questions that are relevant to the job, right? So you're going to ask questions that do not disclose someone's potential protected category. They do not disclose their national origin. They do not disclose their race. You want to ask questions that are strictly about their ability and their competency on how to perform the job. That's going to keep you out of any potential claims of discrimination or retaliation or anything like that. Okay, so once you do hire someone, once you're ready to make a job offer, make that job offer both verbally and in writing, right? So you want to get all the details of the job, again, pulling from some of the job description. You're going to include the pay rate. You're going to include who they're going to report to, their work hours, their status, whether it's going to be part-time or full-time, and include all that information in the job offer. Once they do sign that job offer, they're officially an employee, and you're ready to onboard them within your organization. So what does onboarding look like? A lot of times what onboarding looks like is an employee orientation. Well, you're gonna review your company policies, your handbook. You're gonna have them complete the new hire paperwork, right? So we want to make sure we don't skip that. There are certain forms that are required both at the federal and state levels. So at the federal level, we have the I-9 form, which is called the Employment Eligibility Form. Every employer in the United States is required by law to verify that someone is authorized to work in the United States. So every employee needs to complete an I-9 form. In addition, they also need to complete the tax withholding form, known as the W-4. You can find that on the IRS's website. And your state may have additional forms that they may need to fill out or may be required to fill out. There's also posters and notices that may be required to be provided to them, and it would be required of you to have posted in a conspicuous place or have an employee be able to have access to those posters and notices at any time during their employment with the company. Once you do have your employees fully onboarded, right, it's going to be up to you. This portion here, the workplace culture, has a lot to do with employee retention and employee satisfaction, because it really lays out what the norms are for your organization, for your workplace culture. So is it acceptable for people to arrive 5-10 minutes late? Is that your company culture? Is it acceptable for people to respond to emails a day or two after the email has been sent out? So it really, your company culture should be a reflection of your values and your vision for the company. And the people that are going to get to really really model those values is going to be your leadership team. So it's really important that you choose your leadership team wisely, because they are going to be setting the standard for your company culture, right? They are going to be the people that are going to be able to impact the employee experience and impact your retention, and also your employees' performance in a sense. So it's really important that you pick your leadership team wisely. You provide them the tools that they need in order to be successful. It's two different positions, right? So when someone is good at their job, and they get promoted to a leadership position, that is a whole different position that they need to learn and then they need to master. And a lot of times, what I see in particular with small business owners is that because someone has done so well at their current job, they get promoted, but this person that gets promoted to a manager or to a leader is not given the tools that they need in order to succeed and be able to be an effective leader within the company. And then another thing that you can do is have employee check-ins, right? After you hire someone, doesn't mean that they get, that they get lost somewhere in, one of your departments, or, they just get handed off to a manager. It would be good for you to have check-ins with them. Maybe it's a, 10-minute coffee conversation. How are things going? How's everything? Do you have the tools? Do you have everything you need to be able to perform a good job? That's really setting the employee up for success within your organization. And that should really be the main focus of every leader, is facilitating that process for the employees, facilitating that they have the tools, the resources they need in order to be able to perform their job successfully. So building great employee relations is going to be what's going to keep an employer out of trouble, out of the courtroom, and with profits in your pocket, right? Because if you don't have any employees that are upset about how they were treated, or they're upset about anything in the employment relationship, they are less likely to sue. And so employee relations, being proactive with having positive employee relations with your employees is really key to setting your business up for success. Also ensuring, again, that they have a copy of the policies or your employee handbook, and any updates you make to those policies and employee handbook, that they are aware of what those policies and those changes are and what their expectations of the process are. You want to make sure that they understand the new procedures or the new changes to the policies. Also to performance manage them, right? So ensuring that they have the tools is one thing, but also ensuring that they are performing their job duties up to par is another thing. So that is where your performance evaluations will come into play. And I always recommend at least do an evaluation upon completion of their first 90 days of employment. So that's commonly known in the US as the introductory period, and annually thereafter. I know a lot of apps, they actually have the ability to provide quarterly or sometimes biannually performance evaluations, which I think is great. It's almost like giving them real-time feedback. So that, that is a great tool to be able to have to manage your employees. And with human resources, it's always important to have documentation, right? So the more documentation you have, the better it will be for you, just in case you ever need to refer to that documentation to protect your business from a claim or from a litigation, right? So those performance evaluations are crucial to keeping your documentation on employees. And again, the leadership training, right? So providing your leadership team all the tools they need to be able to succeed as a manager or as a supervisor, that's essential to keeping your employees happy and also keeping them from wanting to file a claim or, claiming discrimination, harassment, retaliation, all those things there. And having a process for terminations, right? So if someone decides to leave, what is your process for that? Do you require them to give you a 2-week notice? Do you provide them any information about benefits? At what point do you do that? Do you require them to give you an exit interview? Or if it's going to be an involuntary termination, you're asking all the questions before you terminate. So has this person filed a complaint? Just as a side note, any complaints about discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, that should always be escalated to human resources, because they can end up litigating about those claims. So just knowing when to engage with human resources, and also knowing what the process is, and ensuring your leaders also know that, and they have crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's. And last pillar to setting a good foundation for your human resources structure is having a good safety plan, right? So this is something that's required from OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So all employers are required to have a safe work environment, to have a safety plan, to make sure that their employees are trained on what that plan is, on all the procedures specific to their industry, and that how to report those injuries to your workers' compensation insurance carrier. So every employer in the US is required to have a workers' compensation insurance to protect their employees from injuries, or be able to provide compensation for them should they become injured. A worst case scenario, death occurs while working on the job. So you want to make sure that you have those benefits available to the employees, and also protecting yourself, protecting your business, right? So this is very important to have. One of the first things you should take action on setting up for your business as you plan to hire employees is, one of the first things to do is get your workers' compensation insurance in place, to make sure that not only you're in compliance with the law, but should anything occur, that you are protected and your employees are also going to be taken care of should there be any injuries. And again, OSHA does mandate training requirements for employers. So depending on your industry, there are different requirements that apply. So it's important to know what those requirements are and that you are keeping record of all those trainings, so that you can, in case of an audit from OSHA, you can show your efforts in trying to be in compliance with that. Now, by now, you're probably thinking, how do I get HR straightened out, right? So good question, because I'm actually having a special promotion for a free HR audit. It's a $1,500 value. And the audit will look at how to find out if your pay practices are in compliance. It's really looking at a sample of your payroll, or looking at your current pay practices in accordance with what the industry or your or your state and federal law mandates. It also will look at your hiring process, right? So don't ever have to deal with anyone, any turnover due to having a choppy onboarding process. So as I mentioned, that's where most employees, and when I hear employers having a hard time finding candidates, I know it is really hard these days, but the ones that actually do come through, we don't want them to have a bad experience and be turned down because, you know, there was a choppy onboarding process or hiring process for them. The audit will also look at the I-9 form. So as I mentioned, every employer in the United States is required to have an I-9 form, employment eligibility. This form has the potential to incur up to $10,000 worth of penalties. During the Trump administration, there was a lot of activity from ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, auditing employers for I-9 forms. I actually did have clients that got audited during that period of time. So the I-9 form has a lot of, it looks very basic if you look at it, but it's very easy to make a mistake because they're just very picky about how it needs to be filled out. Every single field needs to be filled out, even if it doesn't apply. The dates need to be filled out in the format that they want it filled out. A lot of times employees forget to check off like the status that applies to them. They forget to sign, things like that. So this audit will be looking at those I-9 forms, making sure that they are filled out correctly so that you don't incur any penalties should ICE ever audit your I-9 forms. And, you know, prevent lawsuits as well from outdated policies. So are your policies up to date? Is your handbook updated? Your handbook should be updated at least every year. With the way that we've been going with many updates we've had, the handbook should be updated. Your policy should be updated at least every year. And last, it'll look at the employee record maintenance and retention. So this again goes back to having the proper documentation. Everything related to HR is documentation, 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 right? So do your personnel files reflect the proper documentation to protect your business and protect yourself from potential lawsuits and litigations? So again, this special offer, it's a $1,500 value. It's free. There is limited space because again, there is a lot of work that goes into it. So if you are interested, you know, do feel free to check at the end, and I will be sharing a link in my contact information. Now moving on to other updates in the HR world. So at the federal level, we had an update to the independent contractors classification. So this is an area that is, well, at the federal level, was not under a lot of scrutiny until recent years. At the state levels, it's always something that comes up. But we have had an official update as of March of this year, and there is a new classification or a new rule that employers must go by to determine whether a worker is, in fact, an independent contractor or an employee. So this new rule looks at the economic dependence of a person. So that is the ultimate inquiry. So that means that is a worker an independent contractor as opposed to an employee under the Act if the worker, as a matter of economic reality, is in business for themselves, right? So now we have a test that looks at 6 different factors to be able to determine if a person is indeed an independent contractor versus an employee. And you may ask, what's the big deal about having someone as an independent contractor versus an employee? For one, the independent contractors are not really protected from all the labor laws. So all these laws I've mentioned in the past slides, they do not apply to independent contractors, right? So they essentially are not really protected by a lot of the employment laws. Additionally, they actually are, when you pay someone or classify someone as an independent contractor, you might be depriving them from benefits that employees are eligible for. So it is important that you have the proper classification for your workers. Again, so this is a change that has gone into effect. This is at the federal level. If your state has more stringent changes or more stringent rules for independent contractors, you will need to follow those as opposed to state. Also at the federal level, we did see an update to the Fair Labor Standards Act. So as I mentioned, this act looks at everything related to compensating employees. And the change here is that the minimum salary for someone either in a professional, administrative position or executive position, that minimum salary that someone is paid has increased to $844 per week. And the compensation for a highly compensated employee is now at $132,964 per year. However, we're also going to see a change in January 1st, 2025, for the weekly salary to go up to $1,128, and for the highly compensated salary to go up to $151,164. As I mentioned, the I-9 form, that's again required for all employers to fill out. If you missed an update last year, the form does expire every so often. The latest version, the USCIS updated, was dated last year, August 1st of 2023. So that's the form that you should be using to onboard all new hires from this point forward. And if you're in California, we have had a few changes or a few updates to minimum wage. In particular, in the healthcare industry, there's a new law that's to go into effect. It was scheduled to go into effect as of June, then it got postponed to July, and now has been postponed to October. But essentially, this new law intends to increase the minimum wage for healthcare workers to be up to $25 an hour, and it's going to phase it in, starting with $21 an hour. But again, this has been delayed until October of this year. We also did see an increase to the minimum wage here in California for the fast food industry. So if you are a franchise, or if you have a franchise, and you fall within the criteria of what that definition is, you're required to pay employees $20 an hour as of April 1st. And I know a lot of restaurants are actually competing now with fast food restaurants. So they have actually, many of them, updated their minimum wage or matched their minimum wage to $20 an hour as well. So effective January 1 of this year, we had a couple laws that went into effect in California. Again, if you essentially, cannabis use became a protected category by which an employer cannot discriminate an applicant or an employee for use outside of work and off the premises of the workplace. So essentially, employers cannot discriminate based on cannabis use any longer. And last, we also did see an update to non-compete agreements. In California, these were unenforceable for the longest time, but as of January 1 of this year, they actually became illegal. So anyone that has a non-compete agreement or had a non-compete agreement in place was required to notify those employees as of February 14th of this year that contract was void. So if you do have any non-compete agreements in place, you might want to, and you haven't notified your employees or your previous employees, you might want to send them a notification letting them know that that agreement is actually void and no longer in place. Okay, so we'll talk about workplace violence prevention, and this is a new law that went into effect, Senate Bill 553 here in California, requiring of all employers, essentially most employers, to implement a workplace violence prevention plan. Those employers are exempt from the mandate are those that have employees that don't have contact with the public, and those that have employees that have that work remotely outside of the employer's control. Additionally, employers that are exempt are those, for example, in the law enforcement industry and also correctional facilities. So those are the exempt employers. Other than that, the plan applies to all employers, regardless of size. And essentially what the law says is that every employer must establish a workplace violence prevention plan that communicates procedures to their employees, provides training to employees annually, maintains required documentation, and is a living document. So it's constantly updated, it is maintained and implemented, and requires that employees also participate in implementing the plan and updating the plan. What the law defines as violence, the definition of violence under this new act is basically any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in a place of employment. It includes the threat of use or use of physical force against an employee that results or is likely to result in injury, psychological trauma or stress, an incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or other dangerous weapon. So as you can see, this definition is pretty broad. Not only is it for physical threats, but also for psychological and stress as well. So very important that all your leadership team, your managers, your supervisors are aware of what this law covers and how they can prevent workplace violence at your business. The law also defines 4 different types of violence, and employees need to be trained on these definitions as well. So type 1 violence is basically anyone who enters the workplace with an intent to commit a crime. Type 2 violence is violence towards employees from clients, customer, patients, visitors, students, or inmates. Type 3 violence is violence toward an employee from a president, supervisor, former employee, or manager. And type 4 violence is violence that is committed by a person that is not employed by the company, but has a relationship with an employee at the company. So some of the plan requirements are that you must list the individual that is responsible for maintaining the plan. You must include the employees and their representatives' involvement in developing and implementing the plan, the methods to coordinate efforts to implement the plan with other employers. So this would apply if you, for example, subcontract work with other employers. You will need to coordinate with them for what their plan covers and make sure that your employees are in the know about what their plan's procedures are and who the point of contact is as well. It also must cover effective communication efforts, so how to report incidents, how to respond, and your efforts to investigate those incidents. It must ensure that employees comply with the plan, procedures for violence, emergency plan, and then effective training for employees as well. And last, it must identify, evaluate, and correct workplace violence hazards. It must be reviewed on an ongoing basis, and it must be accessible to employees and their authorized representatives. And Cal OSHA again audit. And Cal OSHA is ramping up their audits, just so you know. So it's important to be in compliance and have all your plans in order, just in case they do show up knocking at your door. What they mean by authorized representatives, this would be, for example, like a union shop steward, they call them, like a union representative. That would be an authorized representative. There is a training component to the plan. So the plan requires that you train your employees up on implementation. So again, this needs to be implemented by July 1st. And that you train the employees on an annual basis thereafter. So upon implementation and annually thereafter, or as you hire employees, they will need to be completing that training as well. And the topics that need to be covered in the training are how to report incidents without fear of retaliation, how to what the definitions are. So the definition of violence and the different types of categories of violence. And also needs to provide them the opportunity to ask questions. So I know a lot of employers or a lot of companies out there have developed like online training for the workplace violence training. That may not be fully in compliance. So make sure that you do double check within that it is covering the workplace violence hazards within your industry, because the training needs to be customized to reflect your actual plan for your specific organization. And if you have multiple locations, you need to have a specific plan for each location as well. So again, the training needs to be customized for each person, for each location, and it needs to be provided to the employees on an annual basis. Some additional requirements for the workplace violence prevention plan is that employers need to implement or have in place an incident log. So a lot of employers have in place already a log for any safety or any workplace injuries. You need to have a separate log for any workplace violence hazards, a way for you to be able to log those incidents and maintain records as well. So training records are required to be kept for 1 year. The incident log is required to be kept for 5 years. You need to have also an investigation conducted, and those records need to also be kept for 5 years as well. So there's a lot of record keeping that comes with the requirement of the law. So again, if you do have any questions about that, I'm here to help. So reminding you about my offer on how to get your human resources foundation straightened out or laid out in place. Again, free audit worth $1,500 value, and also to find your pay practices, right? Your hiring process, or to set those in place as well. So with that in mind, I would like to open it up for any questions. I am getting a little feedback from someone. I'm not sure if everyone is muted. So if you could please mute your. There we go. So any questions? Anyone? Let me. check the chat. Yes, so these mandates I did cover, they are actually for for US employers. That is correct. Anyone have any questions? Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'd like to thank you all for joining. Again, keep in mind, if anything does come up, feel free to reach out. Have my contact information on the screen there. And again, reminding you of the free HR audit. If you'd like to take advantage of that, feel free to reach out. And I will actually drop the checklist link into the chat. For those of you who are interested. Okay, so I just dropped the link to the free checklist. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I appreciate your participation and for joining today, and wish everyone a nice day. Thank you.